Good morning, everybody. I'm Christine Romans in for Joe Fryer this morning.
And I'm Savannah Sellers.
Nice to see you all. We begin this morning in the Middle East, where President Trump is preparing for the final leg of his 4-day trip to that region. Following a breakfast meeting with U.S. and Qatar business leaders in Doha earlier today, the president indicated that a nuclear deal with Iran is close.
Iran has sort of agreed to the terms. I want them to succeed. I want them to end up being a great country. And I think we're getting close to maybe doing a deal.
Yesterday, President Trump also announced economic deals between the U.S. and Qatar totaling more than $243 billion. This includes a record-breaking deal between Boeing and state-run Qatar Airways. And before leaving the country, President Trump delivered remarks to American troops at Al Udeid Air Base. He will head to Abu Dhabi and the United Arab Emirates later today. We have NBC News senior White House correspondent Kelly O'Donnell. She's traveling with the president. She joins us from Al Udeid Air Base in Qatar with more on this. Kelly, great to see you. Good morning. So what more do we know about this potential deal with Iran at this point?
Well, the president is certainly talking with optimism about the work that's being done to try to secure peace with Iran and to stop their nuclear ambitions. The president was very direct in saying that, and it's a continuation of U.S. policy, that there cannot be a nuclear-armed Iran. There does appear to be a greater window at the moment to bring about those negotiations, and some of his time here in the Middle East is meant to try to solidify that, to put additional pressure on Iran. And so the president's indicating that there are signs that they are willing to talk. He is also speaking about a hopeful sense of what Iran could be for the Iranian people. So trying to send, in some ways, a softer signal to the Iranian people that they could have a better future, while also leaning hard into this notion that somehow, because he is now on the world stage and is having his emissaries talking directly with Iran, that there can be a window for a negotiation. So that, of course, is critical here in the Middle East. We are in Qatar, where the U.S. base, the largest one in the Middle East, is here. Some troops still here. They're filing out. The president spoke to them a short time ago and has not yet left Qatar for UAE. But this has been a packed trip, as you know. Savannah?
As it has. And Kelly, let's talk about the luxury jet the president's planning to accept from Qatar. How has Qatar responded to what has really been a growing controversy surrounding this gift?
Well, certainly the gift is getting a lot of attention. The president says he wants it, that the United States needs a refreshed Air Force One. Boeing has not provided the one that is under contract. They're behind on delays. And yet this gift, a $400 million aircraft, would need to be retrofitted, and that would be a great cost. The foreign minister, prime minister of Qatar, was asked by CNN about influence buying, if that is what they are attempting to do by offering this gift, which, according to the U.S. Constitution, is not to be accepted from a foreign government. Here's how the prime minister responded.
It is a government-to-government transaction. It has nothing to do with personnel, whether it's on the U.S. side or on the Qatari side. It's Ministry of Defense, Department of Defense.
Qatar says, why would it have to buy influence with President Trump? Well, that is a big question in the United States. Is this very wealthy country that is often engaging in business and certainly trying to put out the best possible hospitality for President Trump? And, of course, the United States provides a lot of security for Qatar. Here on this base, Qatar spends billions of dollars to maintain a base the U.S. uses. So there is a tight diplomatic and economic relationship. The question of, is Qatar trying to have more influence with President Trump? That is an open one. The prime minister says, no, that's not the intention, that it's government to government. That is not necessarily how it's viewed by Democrats and even some Republicans back in the U.S.
Kelly, also, we do want to ask you kind of a scheduling question here for the president. He said this morning that he would go to talks between Ukraine and Russia, these peace talks in Turkey tomorrow, if it was appropriate, was the wording that he used. But that's different than earlier. He had said he would not be there. Now, the U.S. has worked to negotiate a ceasefire between the two countries, of course, since Trump took office in January. It's been filled with a lot of drama, a lot of twists and turns here. So at this point, how involved is the U.S. in these talks? Do we think President Trump will make that trip? And if so, would he be welcomed?
Well, the president has certainly been leaving the door open. He said a number of different things about wanting to be there if Putin were there. Putin is not attending. That seems to be disappointing to Zelensky because he is there as the head of state, and there is a lower level delegation from Russia. So President Trump has kept that an active conversation. He has a very strict schedule. From our experience covering the president, it does not appear there's any infrastructure that's been put in place for him to go to Turkey. Is it possible? Well, it's hard to say no to President Trump when he wants to go and do something. It is not on the schedule at this time. But he wants to be engaged in these talks to try to bring an end to that war. Certainly by keeping engaged and trying to get Putin to be involved, that appears to be part of the president's negotiating style to say he'd be willing to be at the table if that could help to achieve peace. But no bulletins yet on where that stands. We're keeping our eyes open and perhaps our minds open to the possibility the president could change his itinerary at will.
There you go.
So glad you're there.
Change your trip as well. Kelly O'Donnell, thank you very much. Well, Georgetown University professor who was arrested and targeted for deportation by the Trump administration back in March for his pro-Palestinian activism has been released from an ICE detention facility in Texas. Badir Khan Suri, who is from India and married to an American citizen of Palestinian descent, walked out of the Prairieland Detention Center yesterday afternoon. Suri had his student visa revoked after the Trump administration accused him of supporting Hamas, which he strongly denies. Now, speaking after his release, Suri said he was treated badly and wasn't told why he was arrested.
My only wrong maybe is that I married a Palestinian girl who's an American citizen, by the way. Or maybe I have sympathies to very poor people, just to root Palestinians who are facing this ethnic cleansing since 1948. There was no charge, there was nothing. They made a subhuman out of me. They took me from one center to other, not letting my family know, not letting me know that I have attorneys.
A judge in Virginia ruled that Suri's detention was in violation of the First Amendment, the right to free speech, and the Fifth Amendment, the right to due process.
All right, over on Capitol Hill, Health and Human Services Secretary Robert F. Kennedy Jr. faced a grilling from lawmakers Wednesday.
Yeah, Kennedy was pushed on his vaccine skepticism, budget cuts, and drug pricing in a fiery hearing that was briefly interrupted even by protesters.
NBC News Capitol Hill correspondent Melanie Zanona joins us now. Good morning, Melanie. You know, Kennedy was specifically questioned on the measles vaccine, given the number of outbreaks we've seen across the country. Tell us about that exchange.
Yeah, good morning, guys. Secretary Kennedy was certainly in the hot seat yesterday as Democrats really grilled him over his vaccine views. Of course, that was a huge topic of conversation during his confirmation hearing, but it has become an even more pressing issue now that he has become secretary and now that we have seen a deadly measles outbreak in West Texas. Yet the secretary continues to send either misinformation or missignals about some of these vaccines. So Democratic Congressman Mark Pocan of Wisconsin really tried to pin him down on that question, which led to a rather remarkable exchange. Take a listen.
If you had a child today, would you vaccinate that child for measles?
For measles, probably for measles. What I would say is my opinions about vaccines are irrelevant. I don't want to seem like I'm being evasive.
Yeah.
But I don't think people should be taking advice, medical advice from me.
Right. No, I got that. And I'm not asking you to give the medical advice, but would you vaccinate your child for measles?
If I answer that question directly, that it will seem like I'm giving advice to other people, and I don't want to be doing that. I want people to make.
But that's kind of your jurisdiction because CDC does give advice, right?
Now, to be clear, Kennedy is not a doctor, but he is the nation's top public health official, and he is in charge of an agency that is responsible for doling out medical advice. So that exchange right there was a pretty stunning omission and also a very frustrating one for Democrats on Capitol Hill.
Mel, he also faced these questions, as we just mentioned, over the budget cuts, the layoffs that have taken place in his department and the ability for them to get anything done. What did he have to say about that, how he's been impacted?
Yeah, that was the purpose of these hearings, was to talk to him about the White House budget request. But Kennedy was really defiant about some of these proposed cuts from the White House. He argued that what they're trying to do at the agency is spend smarter and make it more efficient. And he also insisted that no critical services would be impacted and that no funding would be withheld for life-saving research. But, you know, it wasn't just Democrats who were expressing concerns about some of these cuts. There were also Republicans on the panel who were questioning him about some specific cuts or even pleading with him in some cases to protect specific medical research foundations in their districts or to protect certain life-saving jobs. So I would say it was certainly a bipartisan grilling yesterday, although more so on the Democratic side.
And Mel, there were protesters interrupting this hearing. Some were protesting Kennedy's views. Others, like the Ben & Jerry's ice cream co-founder Ben Cohen, were protesting against the war in Gaza and accused Congress of being complicit in the devastation in the Palestinian enclave. Tell us what happened exactly.
Yeah, so Capitol Police did confirm that Ben Cohen was arrested yesterday for disrupting the hearing. It is against the law to protest inside congressional buildings. And so Cohen was charged with, according to Capitol Police, crowding and obstructing, but he was not charged with resisting arrest and assaulting a police officer. However, 7 other people who did disrupt the hearing, you can see some of those clips on the screen. They were holding up signs saying RFK kills. They were chanting. They were apparently resisting arrest. They were charged with resisting arrest and assaulting a police officer. So a pretty emotional and raucous moment during yesterday's hearing, guys.
Wild. All right, Melanie Zanona, thank you.
Thanks, Mel. Well, today, the defense team for music mogul Sean Diddy Combs will begin its cross-examination of his former girlfriend, Cassie Ventura, in his federal sex trafficking trial. This comes after Ventura gave 2 days of graphic and emotional testimony that included allegations of rape, of blackmail, drug abuse, as well as physical and psychological abuse. Now, Diddy denies all of the accusations against him. NBC News entertainment correspondent Chloe Malas has been inside the courtroom. She has the story for us, but a warning, some of the details are disturbing.
Cassie Ventura describing a night in August 2018 when she went to dinner with Sean Diddy Combs after they'd broken up, seeking closure. She says when Combs brought her back to her apartment, he came in and raped me on the living room floor. I remember crying and saying no, adding it was fast. His eyes were black. He wasn't himself. Ventura breaking down on the stand as she described the emotional fallout of their tumultuous 11-year relationship, calling Combs abusive and controlling and describing a number of brutal physical assaults. The first, she says, was in 2007 or 2008 in a car. He hit me on the side of my head and I fell to the floor, she testified. I was shocked. I didn't understand why he was so angry. She said after another assault, she asked her mom to take photos of her injuries. And for the 3rd day in a row, prosecutors showed the jury this video of Combs brutally beating Ventura at a hotel.
How important is all of this testimony on the domestic abuse?
The allegations of domestic abuse really help explain why she stayed. And so while maybe they don't have direct bearing, they kind of explain her state of mind.
She also testified that when Combs was angry with her, he threatened to release videos of their explicit encounters with escorts, which they called freak-offs. Ventura says she feared if the videos became public, it would ruin everything I worked for and make me look like a slut. Jurors were shown photos from freak-offs on their own individual screens, shielded from public view. Ventura said they had hundreds of freak-offs, which she says left her feeling emotionally empty and like I did a job, adding they led to infections and that she developed an addiction to opioids, which she used to numb her feelings. She says she ultimately went to rehab because she was spinning out and didn't want to be alive anymore. Combs' lawyers have called him a complicated man, acknowledging Combs has been violent in the past, but they say all sexual acts were consensual and he didn't engage in sex trafficking.
Our thanks to Chloe Malas for that report. Well, a key moment came late in the day when the prosecution asked about Ventura's 2023 civil lawsuit, which she revealed for the first time was settled for $20 million. Now, today, again, Combs' legal team begins their cross-examination. We have NBC News legal analyst Danny Ceballos here to walk us through this. So, Danny, just mentioned that detail there. We've just learned that $20 million settlement, while that is closed, much of her testimony this week has centered on the same rape and abuse allegations that were part of that settlement, that were part of what happened there. So legally, how does her past relationship with Combs, that civil settlement, factor into the prosecution and defense's strategy in this criminal trial? Is it something that they're able to look and say, hey, that's already been dealt with, kind of a thing?
Right. So some of the testimony about rape, domestic violence, while it sounds terrible, that is not exactly what Combs is charged with. The prosecution has a much greater burden than simply proving domestic violence, which is not any of the crimes before the jury. And the defense is certainly going to exploit that. Today, look for them to explore Cassie's credibility. Look for them to explore her memory and look for them to explore her motive. And by motive, I mean her $20 million lawsuit that settled. But that itself is a bit of a double-edged sword, because look for her also to say, yes, I did have a lawsuit, but that was settled a while ago. I have no current financial motive to be here other than to seek justice.
It seems like she could also say, well, it's $20 million because he knows he did something wrong.
Exactly right. And he wouldn't have settled it unless there was a reason to settle it. And we agreed to confidentiality. I'm here just testifying because I believe this is the right thing to do. I don't have any further motive to come here and testify against him.
We should say he has admitted no wrongdoing.
Right,
exactly.
Absolutely. Over the past few days, we've really heard this horrific, traumatic, sort of testimony from her. And now it's on for the cross-examination. What do you expect from the cross-examination? Because that might be, it's tricky. It's tricky to they have to try to poke holes in her credibility, but at the same time, not attack someone who many on the jury might really view as a victim.
Mm-hmm.
It is one of the hardest things for a defense attorney to do, to cross-examine an alleged victim of sexual violence, but they have to do it. And look for them to explore some of the willingness, some of the consent. Now, consent isn't necessarily a defense to these crimes. However, consent, if they can establish some of it, may go a long way with the jury in terms of evaluating her credibility. And as awful as the things are that Cassie testified about, that jury has to assess her credibility. And the reality is, and I know this isn't a popular opinion, sometimes witnesses or complaining witnesses in Cassie's position come off as not credible, sometimes for reasons that aren't even fair. Sometimes jurors sit there and they say, I don't know, I can't really see myself doing what you did. And this is a lifestyle that not a lot of regular people can identify with. I mean, you do have text messages where she says, hey, Combs says, let's have a freak-off, and she says, okay. Now, you can go one of two paths. The jurors will believe her saying, I felt compelled to do that, or they may say, at least one of them may say, you had a few opportunities to leave. And we know now especially that people in Cassie's position sometimes feel like they can't get out of the relationship. But what I'm saying is you may have one or more jurors who just don't identify with this situation and say, I might have left.
But they do have video of her trying to get out of that situation.
Oh, yeah.
And bringing her back, and that might be really compelling.
Yes, absolutely.
As you pointed out yesterday, they've shown that repeatedly. Danny, something else happened, though, also, and this comes into the cross-examination. One of the federal prosecutors accused the defense of withholding exhibits that it plans to use here. They formally requested that it be revealed. The judge denied that. Can you first just sort of from a legal perspective explain how that works? Like how there's something that they're kind of keeping to the side, and also what you anticipate that could mean or we could see happen today.
So what I think happened is that the prosecution turns over documents in discovery. So we're not really talking about documents that were a complete surprise to the prosecution. It was likely part of something that was already considered an exhibit. And I think what was going on is the prosecution was asking specifically for the defense to identify which specific documents in those reams of pages of documents they were planning to use for impeachment or cross-examination. That isn't so much an issue of discovery disclosure. That might be more of a, can you reveal your strategy to us? So that may be why the judge ultimately sided with the defense. It's not quite an issue of, hey, you concealed discovery or concealed exhibits from us. It may be instead we have a giant stack of documents that we, the government, turned over, and you, the defense, we want you to tell us which exactly you plan to use in your cross-examination. That's not so much a disclosure issue. That might encroach into give us your strategy before you do it.
Danny Savalos, thank you very much.
All right, an unusually early season heat wave bringing triple-digit temperatures to Texas. It's forcing people out of the sun and emergency responders to work overtime to help those affected by the heat. Meanwhile, the East Coast still being battered by a series of severe storms that are causing major flooding from Virginia to Pennsylvania. And in Minnesota, a series of uncontained wildfires have already charred roughly 40,000 acres, destroying buildings and forcing evacuations. NBC News correspondent Ryan Chandler has a roundup of all the severe weather from Dallas.
A dangerous dome of oppressive heat, scorching Texas ahead of schedule.
Heat can be extremely dangerous, especially if you don't prepare ahead of time.
At this Dallas EMS station, first responders are preparing for weather's most common killer.
We kind of keep an eye out for younger children, elderly adults.
We're used to the heat in Texas, just not this early. This is an unusual heat wave, giving many areas their first triple digits of the year.
And it's not just in Texas.
This heat is just awful.
Dry heat fueling wildfires in Minnesota. More than 33,000 acres have burned.
It was just too hot, too dry, too much wind.
But as parts of the country bake, the East Coast is getting drenched. From D.C. to New York, some of the country's busiest airports are facing delays because of thunderstorms and rain. It follows major flooding in Virginia. Fire rescue teams said they believed they found the body of 12-year-old Jordan Sims, who was washed away in rushing water Tuesday.
Obviously, this is a very tragic situation.
In Maryland, flash flooding forced evacuations. Water rushing up to the second story of this elementary school. Children carried through the water, rescued on boats. Scientists say extreme deadly weather is becoming more common.
Both of these, extreme heat events and heavy downpours, are precisely the two kinds of extreme weather phenomena that are most clearly linked to climate change.
A link scientists warn could make major weather events more severe. Ryan Chandler, NBC News, Dallas.
Okay, thanks, Ryan. So much going on. Let's get more details on what to expect from the severe weather and the high temperatures with your morning news now weather.
Meteorologist Angie Lastman joins us now. Good morning, Angie.
Morning, ladies. We've got a busy morning already unfolding across parts of the upper Midwest. That's where we find this thunderstorm watch that is in effect at least through 9 a.m. Central Time. And you can see that line of storms working out of basically parts of Iowa and into parts of Minnesota. We're going to see kind of this same setup here as the day goes on, where more of these are likely, these stronger thunderstorms as we get into the afternoon hours specifically. Here's the big picture look. We've got a cold front that's working across parts of the Midwest. This means that today we've got the heavy rain in some spots, but we've also got the chance for severe storms, specifically from Minnesota to Kentucky. The area that we're most concerned about, Minneapolis, stretching down to Chicago and including the western half of Michigan. This does mean that we could see some of those stronger storms with hail, with strong wind gusts, and even some of those stronger tornadoes. Where you see these cross lines, that's where we could see those EF2s or higher. So Eau Claire, stretching to Milwaukee, Chicago, Grand Rapids, all included in that. Heads up for this as the day goes on and we get deeper into the afternoon and evening hours. Tomorrow, not much improvement. We'll just see the severe weather threat shift a little farther to the south and east. So it's the Ohio and Tennessee valleys that will specifically watch for the greatest chance to see some of those strong storms. It's going to, again, be the hail, the winds, elevated over 70 miles per hour, but also, again, those EF2s are higher when it comes to the tornado risk. Evansville, Bowling Green, even Nashville included in that risk for tornadoes as we get into your Friday and wrap up our work week. We are not done with the system just yet, though. Even as we get into Saturday, we'll see that daytime severe threat focused across the mid-Atlantic and parts of the southern plains. Dallas, Little Rock, Washington, D.C., Raleigh all have the chance to see the hail and the winds. The good news is that we're going to look at a lower tornado risk as we head into our Saturday plans. A good amount of rain as well with this, maybe an inch or two in some of the higher amounts up into those northern plains. We'll see upwards of 3 inches because we're just dealing with all that heavy rain from this system. But as we head into the weekend, guys, we'll start to see things clearing up across some of these spots. It'll still be soggy for the Northeast on Saturday, but a nicer day settles in on Sunday.
We'll take it. Thanks.
Love those graphics. Thanks, Angie.
Thanks for watching. Stay updated about breaking news and top stories on the NBC News app or follow us on social media.